Peter Crone, one of my favorite people in the world, the mind architect himself.
To be human is to suffer. You get to choose how you suffer.
Unbridled positive thinking is the gateway to big trouble. Ultimately, the answer is in truth.
Perspective is reality. My view of myself is going to dictate the world I live in.
And then it's studying it to see what works for you.
Exactly.
Because motivation is not the same for everybody.
The game of being human is not linear. It's not about survival. It's not about progressively making more money, going from an apartment to a home, to a bigger home, to getting more followers, to having a nicer car, to having 2 cars, to getting a boat. For me, I'm much more interested in the vertical ascension, which is the transcendence of the constraints that we arrive so that we can tap into the boundless nature of our true essence.
Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. This episode series is called The Doctor and the Nurse. Dr. Daniel Amen and I break down the highest performers in all different areas. He goes deep into the brain science. I interview on the actionable tools, and we put it together for the most incredible episodes to bring to you how you can perform at your highest level. Today, I'm talking with Peter Crone on the topic of mindset. So let's dive in. Peter Crone, one of my favorite people in the world, the mind architect himself. Thank you for coming on, and we're just diving into him. And the goal of this episode is to know how to best use your mind as a tool, winning the daily battle in the mind for the positive, obviously not the negative. So in working with some of the top athletes, entrepreneurs, actors, creatives, business people, the whole gamut, the whole spectrum, you are the top of the top, in my opinion, and I would say the world's opinion as well. What stands out to you? If you can pick a few things, what stands out to you about the mindsets of the greatest in the world?
Ooh, you just won the biggest answer out of the gate. I love that.
We hit them from the start. Why would I jab when I can throw around, just a deadly uppercut?
Right with that big right hook. I love it. So if I were to bring it down to one word, I would say it's discipline. Right. And the reason I use that word is because if you understand what it is to be human, without wishing to sound too sort of macabre out of the gate, to be human is to suffer. Human and suffering are synonymous. It is, as long as I'm human, then suffering is commensurate with that, right? It would be as asinine as me saying, I like to jump in the ocean, but I don't want to get wet. Would be saying, oh, I want to be human, but I don't want to suffer, right? So that's the first thing we have to address out of the gate, is that by virtue of being here in this dimension, in this avatar, this physical meat suit, with the trials and tribulations that we've all been through and the associated constraints of our subconscious that give rise to the internal experience of fear, limitation, and the need to survive, right? It's the primordial imperative of every mammal to try and survive. So our brain is always trying to predict and protect because we want to obviously avoid pain and seek pleasure. That means that we're going to suffer. So to come back to your question, you get to choose how you suffer. Do you suffer by staying within the constraints and managing the world of limitation and trying to avoid suffering, which is a form of regret, which means that you live a smaller life, a very linear track life, where I'm not actually tapping into my potential, but rather I'm trying to avoid pain or I'm trying to avoid embarrassment. It's an avoidant energy. That's one form of suffering. The other form of suffering that I see from the greatest in the world is discipline, which points to I am committed to transcend, to get beyond, and to break through my constraints versus sit within the comfort/discomfort of them. One is expansive, one is contracting, right? So either way you suffer. So for me, you might as well choose the one that helps you tap into your potential and live an expansive, extraordinary life.
I love it. So what I'm hearing is there's acceptance, and you're not looking at things as is the upward counterfactual thinker always looks at something as, well, this is the worst that happened. The downward counterfactual is, it's not that bad. So is the suffering aspect just more of an acceptance, and then that acceptance plus the discipline is kind of the, foundational formula, would you say?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, it's like, look at the sport that you work a lot in, like basketball, right? If I'm a British guy who's never played and I run onto the court and I pick up a basketball and I just put it under my armpit and I run from one end to the next, like, the guys are like, whoa, 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 dude, you can't do that. Like, you got to bounce that rock, right? So there's certain rules that build into different games, right? And so what I'm saying is, yes, the acceptance component could speak to the fact that one of the rules, albeit not necessarily mutually agreed upon, is that by virtue of being human, you're going to struggle. There's challenges, right? It's the game that we're here for. So what I'm pointing to is sort of then the discipline beyond that, or the choice beyond that, is like, okay, hi, welcome to planet Earth. You are human X, and by virtue of being here, some of the rules are you're going to have challenges, obstacles, trials and tribulations. You're going to experience loss, grief, failure, disappointment, and we're going to put under the big auspices called suffering. Now, the opportunity you have is either you can sit in the regret and be a victim of life, which is one form of suffering, which I would assert is 1,000x worse than the opportunity of the other way of playing the game, which is much of your suffering is by virtue of the fact that you live within these prisons of your subconscious. And the game that a lot of people who are committed to having a more extraordinary life, the game they play is that I want to be able to break through those, transcend them, and overcome them. That's what I'm pointing towards as discipline.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, let's take that a little bit deeper on the subconscious.
Sure. Let's go.
Let's go. Okay. So reality versus story.
Yes.
It's interesting, right? Like Carl Jung, one of the four founders of the subconscious mind and his work, and just tapping into the difference of it with the conscious is when you say, hey, let's tell ourselves this positive story, is it bending what is actual reality, or is reality even a thing? Like, what's the difference when we start telling ourselves these stories of, say, I want to be the best basketball player in the world? Is there danger to that? What do you think in when I say reality versus story, and how do we live in this balance of not crossing the line to more of a pathological, just telling ourselves lies?
Sure. I mean, reality, you could say there's sort of an objective reality and then there's a subjective reality, right? And what I'm much more interested in is the subjective reality. How do we react mostly, but hopefully respond, and better than that, create life? So we could say that
I like that.
Perspective is reality. Now, not necessarily in terms of the objective, but rather my view of myself is going to dictate the world I live in. If someone's walking around thinking that they are not good enough, that they are a failure, that they are not loved, that is going to give rise to the reality they experience, right? Wherever you go, there you are. So the view that we have of life, which for the most part is something that people are oblivious to, it's a blind spot. But the view that we look through, we are a walking conversation that gives rise to a particular perspective, which then gives rise to our reality, which is actually completely appropriate for the lessons that we're here to learn, as far as I'm concerned, from a karmic perspective, right? Why is it that somebody attracts a particular mate, a particular spouse, that triggers within them the feeling of lack of respect, inadequacy, not being wanted, not being admired? Because that's something that they're here to learn. You obviously are aware of the fact that I write in many quotes, and one of the more popular ones I have that people love is that life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. So you are going to attract the people and circumstances to, in another way of saying that, reveal where you're confined, aka not free. Why is that a gift? Well, because we're here, as far as I'm concerned, to recognize our own true divinity, to recognize that we are timeless, boundless beings, and that freedom is one of our inherent characteristics. And so that's why, for me, the game of being human is not linear. It's not about survival. It's not about progressively making more money, going from an apartment to a home, to a bigger home, to getting more followers, to having a nicer car, to having 2 cars, to getting a boat. That's a linear track. For me, I'm much more interested in the vertical ascension, which is the transcendence of the constraints that we arrive so that we can tap into the boundless nature of our true essence.
Man, I could listen to you for today. You just flow so beautifully. And you said that word transcendence, transcendent thinking. Recently, there's been a study from the University of Southern California, Rosier School of Education, about teenagers and the hallmark for transcendent thinking in shaping the brain for the rest of their life. Transcendent thinking, of course, the deeper meaning, historical context, civic significance. Is there a way that we can prioritize transcendent thinking to help our brains grow, essentially for the future us who are going to be our potential, as you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully by virtue of the fact that consciousness as a whole is evolving, I'd like to think that the intentionality behind this whole human experience is that we become increasingly aware. We improve our IQ, our EQ, our PQ, our SQs, that we actually become a far more civilized and advanced society, right? And that doesn't always look like it in many arenas, unfortunately. But if that is the case, then that does trickle down into how parents parent and the kids, what they listen. It does come into our school system, so that the conversations about, spirituality, relative versus the absolute, consciousness, mindfulness. I just was speaking on a big panel yesterday about mindfulness, right? And the fact that this is now becoming a much more common conversation, so that can shift the needle in terms of people realizing, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not just about me going through the motions of a 9 to 5 and sitting in traffic for an hour or two on my way to sit inside of a artificially lit building just so that I can pay a mortgage and be, sustaining a life that I'm actually don't even have time or energy to be a part of, right? People are starting to have bigger questions. So I think it's just by virtue of the fact having conversations like this, the myriad of podcasts that are out there right now that help people to sort of think different, and go, oh, wait a minute, maybe it just doesn't have to be this way. Maybe these experiences of the more commonplace forms of suffering, which is dysfunction, dis-ease, depression, anxiety, all of these things don't necessarily have to be there. If I can tap into the authorship that I have as a being, that I can start to consciously create my life versus be an unconscious victim to it, then I stand a chance of tapping into something that's infinitely more powerful and also way more fulfilling.
Well, I think that's it, right? Like, people will go through their lives, and then at some point later in their lives, they look back on it and they regret. There's a stat, it's like only 8% of people ever accomplish what they set out to do or what they dreamed of when they were a kid. Mm-hmm. Do you think at the most basic level, and just like an actionable tool for people, would be to just say, why is it like this in any situation and scenario that they're in? Kind of look at the other side of the coin instead of just accepting it is, and they have to do a 9 to 5, they have to do the mortgage, they have to do this, they have to fill in the blank. Is the most basic conceptual thing you can ask yourself is, well, why is it this way? And just start thinking. Is that kind of the way that it's like, I'm just trying to break it down in like the best way to have these deeper conversations and more, meaningful thoughts.
It's not a bad place to start. I think, if you look at any child, like the number one word that they use is why, right? Why, mommy? Yeah, why, daddy?
Good point.
And I think if you really look at that, it points to something that is very intrinsic in the human experience, which I would point to as curiosity. I would argue, without getting too esoteric, that the nature of who we are as beings is that we are consciousness curious to know itself. And it's through the diversity of having, in this case, 8 billion people, God knows how many species of animals, variety of colors and flora and fauna, all of the things out there that create this incredibly epic heaven on earth that we seem hell-bent on destroying. But, that there is this incredible curiosity and fascination that we all have at the core of who we be. And so I think asking that question is very valid. It does point to self-awareness, to get to know thyself, right? I think in any traditional spiritual tradition, if you were to go to an ashram with a Ramana Maharshi or Sri Nisargadatta, like any of these big gurus, like one of the leading questions they have students, followers ask themselves is, who am I?
Yeah.
And so, that it's like really beyond my thoughts, beyond my name, beyond my nationality, beyond any chosen religion or like inherited religion, but beyond, my body weight and all of the different vital signs of my physicality. Like what is beneath all of that? Like if I had no sense of self, we do land on what we could, some people teachings called the witness or the observer. We land on consciousness itself. Yet we all become so misidentified with this physical meat suit and the circumstances of our life as though that's who I am. Oh no, someone might say I'm 44 years old, I'm an attorney, I'm a husband, and I'm 190 pounds. Well, are you? Because what happens when you retire? So you were an attorney, but now you're not. So really it begs the question for me to ask people, if there's anything that you can change, then it can't be you, because you're the consistent behind the change that happens.
Oh, there's another quote. If that wasn't in your quote book already, that is powerful.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep going down this path of how powerful the mind is in terms of healing the body. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with Dr. Bruce Lipton and his work on the positive beliefs activating the healing process, while negative beliefs can contribute to illness. What are your thoughts on thoughts healing the body?
It may sound like semantics, and I love Bruce, right? I was in a documentary called Heal with him, and I think his work is extraordinary. And I think apart from anything, he's just a really fun guy. So the way that you phrase the question, I would certainly concur that negative thoughts have a deleterious effect on the body, right? I wouldn't say so much that positive thoughts heal the body. I would actually put it this way. I'd say it's the absence of confining thoughts, or what you're calling negative. Positive and negative coexist in this world of duality. You have to have both, right? You've got up, down, good, bad, male, female. All the pairs exist, right? So I would, in my work, when I help people to quote unquote tap into healing as an experience, the body's always trying to heal. The question is, to what degree are we creating some sort of blockage, constraint, limitation that, might fall under the auspices of the general term negative thinking? To what degree does that impede the natural flow of vitality that is wanting to sort of cascade through our body, right? Like, I would assert that the faucet of vitality from the universe is always open and on, right? Like, here's vitality, here's the replication of cells, and without any kind of compromise or interference with that cell replication process, then you create a brand new cell that turns out to be hair, skin, gallbladder, kidney, or whatever it is. However, if there is some sort of interference, it could be, predominantly I focus on mindset, what I call dis-ease, right? The absence of ease in our system, because we're in fight or flight, we're in some form of stress, because we're looking through these constraints of the subconscious, where, as I said, I'm not good enough, I'm not wanted, I'm not loved, I'm not safe, something that is a negation against ourselves, where we are now in resistance to life and in fundamentally an emotion of fear. That fear does physiologically tap into the sympathetic nervous system, otherwise known as fight or flight. And that is going to release the norepinephrines, the adrenalines, the cortisols, which isn't a healing/healthy environment, right? Which is why I make a bold statement, which is that if you're going to access true vitality, then you first have to free your mind. So yes, is sort of the answer to your question about negative and positive, but I would go even beyond that, which is not so much negative or positive. You could say, for example, most people right now would be watching this at a computer, a laptop, or on their phone. And by virtue of the conditioning and the programming of their device, if they were to go to the keyboard and they hit an S and they're sending a text or an email to someone, an S will show up on the screen. Now, we could say that was positive. What I would actually say is, if you press the S and a T comes up on the screen, or a W, it's not so much that that's negative, it's just that the system isn't in integrity. Right? And so if we look at it that way, what is the quote unquote interference in that programming that doesn't allow it to act in accordance with its intention? And so if we look at the human body and the mind in the same way, how are we supposed to quote unquote replicate cells and create vitality naturally, versus what have we become normalized to in terms of poor sleep, like nutrient deficient foods, GMOs, all sorts of toxicity in our products, our clothes, our air, our soil. And then on top of that, I think the most impactful part is, yes, some sort of limiting conditioning in our thoughts that is really the ultimate sacrifice or self-defeating dialogues that we have, where we feel that we're fundamentally inadequate and insecure. That, to me, is the biggest contributor to the absence of health. So really, to sum it up, vitality is our birthright. However, based on our conditioning, there is usually many, many forms of blocking that. And the most predominant, the most powerful that I've seen is the way that we have some sort of confines in the subconscious of our mind that has us live in a state of limitation, fear, and suffering.
Wow, that's really well said. And it's almost like we're in a dodgeball game of everything the world throws at us in terms of nutrition, EMFs. It's almost like instead of playing on the proactive, it's almost how do you negate these things that are coming at us so that you can stay the healthiest mentally and physically that you can. It's almost as if you can't really ever get ahead. But you know what? In terms of the limiting beliefs and just the unwiring of the brain, right? Do you find that people's past is essentially what they determine who they are? I'm sure you do a lot of unwiring, myelin in the brain of somebody's past. But just like you were talking about before of, well, this is the way I am. This is who I am because of fill in the blank. Is that ultimately the past? And how do we come to terms with the past, accept it, and move towards a better version of who we're created to be?
For sure. I mean, if you ask anyone who they are or to describe themselves, every piece of information they're going to use is reference to their history. So it's a misorientation of what it means to be a creative being, right? Somebody, if you would ask them to describe themselves, they don't describe themselves 2 months from now. And that just alone can be like a really inspirational trigger for people to go, wow, why wouldn't I?
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
I'm always referencing me and my circumstances based on my past, which means I'm always informed by it, which is the self-fulfilling prophecy that most people are constantly trying to avoid, but that is in lay terms the self-sabotage, right? So if I'm being informed by my history, then that has to be a reactive state of mind, right? Because I'm repeating something that was an action that I've already been through, whether it be like literally something I did or something that I felt. And this is why most people have these reoccurring relationships. They have these reoccurring professional hiccups where maybe they're not getting their value in the marketplace appreciated, or they're like, why did I just go from one job to the next? And yet I still feel unfulfilled and unseen. Well, because you're being defined by a history that you've yet to reconcile. So yes, much of my work is to recognize that your history, and again, you know this quote of mine, and many people have it. I actually now have got quite a few people who've tattooed it, which is phenomenal. Yeah, we just got another one. Yeah, really moving story that I'll share after I tell the quote. But, you know, what happened and couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. And that's one way in a foul swoop, not saying it's easy, but to reconcile and fundamentally let go of our history because we let be our history because that's all that could have happened. And then we start to reorient ourselves. So instead of looking over our shoulder, it's the quintessential analogy of driving a car, but the way you drive is by looking in the rearview mirror, right? And then wondering why you keep running into shit. Well, because you're being referenced by something behind you, right? And you start to see the futility of that. But the story that's so moving, one of these guys that reached out, he had really struggled with a lot of suicidal ideation, depression, and had actually attempted suicide multiple times, to the fact that, you know, on his forearm, on his left forearm, there were a series of scars from different cuts that he had attempted or actually made in an attempt. Anyway, the last attempt was actually very close to, quote unquote, you know, taking his life, sadly. But fortunately, I guess he woke up in hospital and he was okay. And he heard that quote on a podcast that I was on. And he now has, across, I don't know, a dozen, maybe 15 scars on his forearm, he has the quote, what happened and couldn't happen any other way because it didn't, as a tattoo, which for him was reflective and representative of him forgiving himself for all of his past failures, because he didn't know more than he knew within the level of awareness he had at the time. And it's just such a moving testament to somebody who found peace with their history so that they could, as I said, do the 180, start looking forward. Even if you have the expression, I'm looking forward to seeing somebody tomorrow. I'm looking forward to going on vacation next week, right? We want to have a future orientation to a vision that hopefully is consciously created, that inspires us to be who we are today, that takes the actions that then fulfill on that, versus being somebody who's constantly trying to get away from a history that they have some sort of grievance about, or that they are, you know, hurt by. So it's two very fundamentally different ways of living life.
I've never been around someone who has the ability like you to just through words and perspectives and mental training mindset to be able to literally change someone's life. Like you have that ability at a higher level than anybody I've been around. So I just need to call that out. And it's amazing. It's amazing what you do. And man, before we get out of here, I think it's going to be really interesting too to hear your answer on this as a, you deal a lot with high performers and flow state being the effortless effort when time is just going by. You don't even know you're there. Your highest fulfillment and potential, either athletically, mentally, whatever it might be. What do you think? Is there a way that you tap into flow state? Do you have any things that when you need to be locked in, you're about to give a talk or you're coaching somebody through a very intense situation that you do to get into flow state?
It's a great question. And unfortunately, the problem lies in the question, right? Because is there anything that you do to get into flow state? If you look at the subtle implication of the words and the language, and again, as you know, I traffic in language, so I get very specific with words because you may or may not know, and perhaps some of the audience don't know, but abracadabra, which is what a magician says, its actual Hebrew translation is, as I speak, so I create. So I want people to understand that we are all magicians and that our words are the spells that we cast to create the reality that then we step into and live by. So for me, that's not that I do anything to step into flow state. I would assert when there's the absence of the idea of myself, I am in flow state. Flow state is.
That's good.
So it's not something that I do or something that I try to manufacture, create, or get into, but rather in the absence of any thoughts that have got anything to do with time, psychological, past, or future, then what I am is present. And so presence to me is synonymous with flow state. So it's not about trying to get into flow state. Rather, it is the eradication and the removal, the mitigation, and the absence of anything that would have me be out of flow state, which would be something in my head based in psychological time. So it's the profound acceptance of my history. I often use this expression, I say, let go, don't know. Right? So let go of my history and I don't know my future, which means that I get to just stay where I am.
It is ultimately the letting go, right? I mean,
to a certain degree, yes. But there's also if you think of past and future as nothing but mirror images, right? When you step in front of your bathroom mirror in the morning to brush your teeth, wash your face, whatever it is, you don't stand in front of the mirror and see this, 6-foot blonde girl, right? Like, at least I hope you don't. Well, I mean, it might be the missus behind you, right? But,
I was just gonna say.
But so the mirror doesn't lie, right? And so equally, when we understand psychological impacts of how we drag our history, superimpose it into what we think might happen again, the whole process of reaction and then the avoidant energy, or the perpetuation of us trying to repeat something that was good, like, I just want to get back to where I was with my health, my finances, my relationship. The futility of that is because you can't, right? But when you understand the dynamics of the mirroring of past and future, it's when you collapse one, the other one also vanishes. As soon as you move out of the way of the mirror, there's no you in the mirror, right? So as long as we can reconcile and truly profoundly accept our history, then what that does is it opens us up to a future that we're oblivious to, which is the realm of pure possibility. Then we start to go from being reactive humans to creative humans, and it's an entirely different experience of life.
Beautiful. And Peter, you are amazing, simply amazing. You're just, a joy to talk to, and you just live your life with a lot of joy. So people that don't know you, you are the real deal. You live it how you talk it. Thanks for coming on, man. It's I know people are going to be blown away by this, as they always are. Your episodes just viral, for lack of a better word.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to see you, my friend. And I'm always honored to be able to contribute to people's audiences. And my only hope is that it truly makes a difference.
You're making a huge difference. And now let's check in with Dr. Daniel Amen and figure out what's going on inside Peter's brain when he talks about mindset. So in this episode with Peter Crone, the mindset architect, we're going to talk about mindset, the power of positive thoughts versus negative thoughts. Can it heal your brain? Does it deter and then deteriorate your brain on the negative side? Peter is a mastermind in being able to control thoughts and helping you tap into your highest level of thinking on this mindset-focused episode. In this clip, we're going to talk about the power of positive thoughts being able to heal your brain. Here we go. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with Dr. Bruce Lipton and his work on the positive beliefs activating the healing process while negative beliefs can contribute to illness. What are your thoughts on thoughts healing the body?
It may sound like semantics, and I love Bruce, right? I was in a documentary called Heal with him, and I think his work is extraordinary, and I think apart from anything, he's just a really fun guy. So the way that you phrase the question, I would certainly concur that negative thoughts have a deleterious effect on the body, right? I wouldn't say so much that positive thoughts heal the body. I would actually put it this way. I'd say it's the absence of confining thoughts, or what you're calling negative. Positive and negative coexist in this world of duality. You have to have both. Sure. Right? You've got up, down, good, bad, male, female. All the pairs exist, right? So I would, in my work, when I help people to quote unquote tap into healing as an experience, the body's always trying to heal. The question is, to what degree are we creating some sort of blockage, constraint, limitation that, might fall under the auspices of the general term negative thinking?
So when Peter's talking about positive thoughts and negative thoughts, is there something that's happening in the brain when you have positive thoughts that can heal past traumas, that can essentially heal your brain to be healthier just based on thoughts, and then also negative thoughts affecting the health of your brain?
I'm of two minds. Because unbridled positive thinking is a gateway to big trouble.
Good.
Right. They did a study at Stanford looking at 1,548 10-year-old children, and then they followed them for 90 years, looking at what went with success, health, and longevity. And the people that died the earliest were the don't worry, be happy people, because they died from accidents and preventable illnesses. Now, I have an older brother who I adore, who's 150 pounds overweight, and he's totally the don't worry, be happy. He's like off work at 3:00, goes, plays golf. He had more fun. And part of me sort of wished I was like him, because I'm very driven and I work really hard. And then I read this study and I'm like, I'm going to outlive him, because I'm very conscientious. I say I'm going to show up. I show up consistently, repeatedly. So you can go wrong with positive thinking. And then I'm working on a new book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Pain, about the intersection between physical and emotional pain. And the goodists among us actually have more pain. That you sort of have to get in touch with your inner Hannibal Lecter and not push down your emotions, but learn how to express them in a positive way. And my favorite movie of all time is Pollyanna, the Disney movie Pollyanna. And because she has the glad game, right? Which, whatever situation you're in, what is there to be glad about in the situation? And in working on this new book, I had to sort of introduce Pollyanna and Hannibal Lecter to see, okay, I have to be in touch with my rage. I can't just stuff it because it's going to come out in back pain. But at the same time, look for what's good in the situation. So it's balancing it.
Yeah.
And ultimately the answer is in truth.
Good
it's
point.
like, know the truth will set you free. And
really
in my ant killing process, so I teach people about ants, automatic negative thoughts. It's not about positive thinking. It's about accurate thinking with a positive spin. So if I think, for example, Tana, my wife, never listens to me. I've had that thought. She has ADD. She said it publicly. And I'm like, come on, listen to me. If I don't examine the thought, right? If you don't assess your thoughts, you believe them. And then you act as if they're true even though they may not be. And so I had that thought. Tana never wrote it down. And so it's 5 questions. Is it true? Yes. Is it absolutely true? Absolutely not. I've written 19 public television specials, and I write all the scripts. Wow. And she's listened to all of them.
Wow.
And she's brutally honest, which is exactly what I want, because I know she loves me, right? No, it's absolutely not true. The third question is, how does that thought make me feel? It makes me feel sad and lonely. And how does the thought make me act? Irritable. I'll either avoid her or I'll be more irritable with her. And what's the outcome of having that thought? Suffering and separation. The fourth question is, well, how would I feel if I didn't have that thought? I'd feel perfectly fine. And how would I act like a good husband? And what's the outcome of not believing the thought? Closeness. And then you take the original thought, question 5, and you turn it to the opposite. Tana does listen to me. And I'm like, and now I have examples of that. And you also turn around to opposite self and others. So the opposite is, she does listen to me. Self, I don't listen to myself, which is often true. Other, I don't listen to her. And I'm like, uh-oh, because I'm busy. And it's this playful exploration of your thoughts that cause them not to stick. Because if that thought would stick, then I'd be sort of more irritating to her. She's less likely to listen to me, and it's more likely to blow up relationships. Relationships are often blown up by ant infestations and your ants then mate with your partner's ants, and then they create these super baby ants that ruin you.
Yeah, it's ultimately the truth, right? The positives can be
what
false
you want
truths,
is the truth, and put a positive spin on it, because optimists do live longer than pessimists.
Yeah, and you don't want any baby ants. Okay, in this clip, Peter Crone is going to talk about tapping into flow state, the feeling of effortless effort when time just passes by, the highest state of high performance. Is there a way that you tap into flow state? Do you have any things that when you need to be locked in, you're about to give a talk, or you're coaching somebody through a very intense situation, that you do to get into flow state?
It's a great question. And unfortunately, the problem lies in the question, right? Because is there anything that you do to get into flow state? If you look at the subtle implication of the words and the language, and again, as you know, I traffic in language, so I get very specific with words, because you may or may not know, and perhaps some of the audience don't know, but abracadabra, which is what a magician says, its actual Hebrew translation is, as I speak, so I create. So I want people to understand that we are all magicians, and that our words are the spells that we cast to create the reality that then we step into and live by. So for me, that's not that I do anything to step into flow state. I would assert when there's the absence of the idea of myself, I am in flow state. Flow state is.
That's good.
So it's not something that I do or something that I try to manufacture, create, or get into, but rather in the absence of any thoughts that have got anything to do with time, psychological, past, or future, then what I am is present.
I think this question revolves around, how do you clear the brain? Let's say it's you're coaching a high level athlete and they are just so many thoughts, thinking too many things. How do you just let their brain be clear and, like Peter was alluding to, be absent of thought instead of worrying about what they need to do?
Yeah, I'm more left brain than Peter. I want to be able to go, okay, here are the steps.
So am I.
I'm like, here are the steps. Because otherwise, I think you can't teach it. It's
Good
like,
point.
just live it. And it's like, okay, how do I do that?
But how do you actually live it?
How do I
Very
actually
good point.
do it? And I think the first step is you learn how to manage your mind, that you don't believe every stupid thing you think. When Alicia Newman was on the runway for pole vaulting, she imagined 2 white lines on the edge of the runway, and they're white hot coals. So the ants couldn't jump in.
Oh, so good.
There. So, and we worked a lot on no mind, right? Trust, your training. And so she would have cues like grip it and rip it, or I'm going to hit the box hard where they plant the pole. And only thing I'm focused on is my upper arm. And so she's trusting her training because she's done it thousands of times, and which is why practicing perfectly is so important, right? It's build the neurons, build the long-term potentiation, build that connection perfectly, right? Which is why practice is so important. And then when you're there, don't let your mind screw it up, right? Your brain's going to be incredibly important, right? The idea, we have to take the brain out of it, it's complete stupidity. It's like the brain is there. You want to put your brain in an optimal state, which means you need to have slept the night before, and you need to have imagined perfect performance.
That's good.
But then when you are actually performing, that's when you want to sort of take your mind offline and trust your practice.
Yeah, and the great cues, not thinking about too many things, but you sounds like you gave her just one or two things. That's what you focus on, eliminates all the other distractions and noise.
Another interesting thing, which I'd actually be interested in your thoughts. Some of the most successful people are successful proving people wrong. And I'm like, that doesn't go with Pollyanna, right? So I'm like, why don't we prove people right? And then I realized, no, I can't put my values on her. I said, every tournament we win or we learn. So let's just measure, do you fly higher proving people wrong, or do you fly higher proving people right? And not have judgment on it, but just be curious. And in the finals, we had this great image of both that, and for some reason, she had an image of minions, that the minions, so the people who were against her, the people she was going to prove wrong, they would blow up in the stands, and the minions would go grab their energy. They'd put energy in buckets, and they'd bring them to her so she could fly higher. And the people who were going to prove, she was going to prove right, the people who supported her were all sort of holding hands together, protecting her from the negative energy. But it turned out it was both.
I think it is. I think it's a balance between both. Like Michael Jordan used to talk about, he wanted to he would play a game within the game. So he'd create his own game of, this person talked trash, this person thinks they can guard me, when in reality it wasn't happening. So he would have that type of proving people wrong, but then he also had the mindset, and this is coming from George Mumford, his mental coach, who is amazing, and that every time he stepped on the floor, he imagined that somebody new in the audience would never be able to see him again. So he wanted to perform for that person who will never see him again. So I think it's a balance of both to get to that level. I love the minions, though. That's really cool picture imagery, man. That's awesome.
And then it's studying it to see what works for you.
Exactly.
Because motivation is not the same for everybody. And I think if you're a little ADD-ish, proving people wrong will work better for you.
Yeah,
I think if you're a more connected person, proving people right will work for you. And I think don't judge it. Just try it.
Yeah, like a teeter-totter. Figure out which side you need more of. It's good. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Took a lot away from it. There's plenty more where that came from, and you can find another episode right here. Come on, you can click it right here.